Yeah, sure. So, yes, we have Dr. Louise Kelly. She has a PhD in strategy. She's teaching in the University of Laverne, College of Business and Public Management. Dr. Kelly, uh, she specialized in strategic innovation, leadership, research, entrepreneurial top management, team leadership, with additional specialty in women leadership. She published widely in academic journals. She authored 5 books. 5 books. One of them is called titled "A Dictionary of Strategy," a Psychologist Manager, and a 2-volume set of Pressure entitled Entrepreneurial Women, New Leadership and Management Models. And we both together, we published 3 articles, the role of CEO in transformational leadership in driving innovation culture and innovation management. And another one about gender differences in innovation. And the third one was about the individual behavior of the individual innovation behaviors. Yeah. And how that interact with the personality traits. And all of those articles were in top tier journals, tier 1 and tier 2 journals, right?
Yeah.
Well, welcome, Dr. Kelly, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Zarek. And it's a great pleasure to be with you all today. And it's still dark here. We don't have the California sunshine yet here in Los Angeles because it's 6:06. So, but I guess it'll dawn as we go through the presentation. But I do want to really thank Hitendra for some mentorship that you've done in the innovation area, and then also Zarek. Zarek, it's been just such a joy working with you, and my best doctoral student ever, Abdulrahman Zarek, and that's because of who he is, his values, and the journey that we've been on with innovation research. And there's more to come, as we know. And as far as books, I have agreed with Paul Grave Macmillan to write a new book, which is always a big undertaking. But that new book is going to be called Mindfulness for Authentic Leadership, Theory and Cases. And it's a new area. And I'm actually not going to talk about authentic leadership today. But maybe a follow-up. We'll do something on that. So, and then actually I do want to pay homage to my dad, Joe Kelly. He's the one who got me started he wrote the first textbook in organizational behavior back in the 60s, and Scottish father of mine, and Scottish Irish, and he's a great inspiration for me. So I got this, recently got that portrait from my brother when he visited. That was a wonderful. All right, so let me start with our presentation today. And I'm happy, I don't know what the custom is, but I'm happy to share these slides if that's what you folks do. I'm not sure. All right, so leadership for innovation. That's what I'd like to talk about, all the different angles that we can look at leadership for innovation. And as Zarek says, it is the art and science. And the science is based on what we know works, and the art is who you are and your values and your personality and how you do this. So when I think about preparing a talk like this, I was actually in the Big Island in Hawaii at the Western Academy of Management about 2 weeks ago. And I was thinking a lot about the presentation. And sometimes there's this, I don't know if this happens to you, sometimes there's a song that keeps going in your head. So I would like to share with you, let's see if I can cue it up, what was been going through my head as I think about this for quite some time now. Let's see, I don't know if I can do it. Okay, let's see if I can get to where I want to go in this. Okay, there we go. So for some reason, that was the song that kept going through my head. And what I'm really asking is, what's leadership got to do with it? And is leadership something that is a secondhand emotion? Is that a second order step, or is this a prime mover? And I would say, let's see if I can get to the next slide. I would say it's a prime mover. I would like to suggest to you the primacy of the role of the leader in directly impacting innovation. And this in my view, maybe we all see things through our own lens, but this is, in my view, where it starts. And when we talk about this, maybe getting used to my slides here. When we talk about this innovation, what are these companies that are really hitting it out of the park in terms of innovation? One of the numbers, Salesforce.com, and we're going to talk a little bit about Mark Benioff. Of course, Amazon, Tencent Holding, extremely successful. We all know Apple, Hindustan Unilever, interesting. Google, of course, and a few other companies, Monsanto, a lot of these tech companies dominating in this area. Who are the leaders of these companies? Of course, Bezos, Musk, Zuckerberg. I would not call the most innovative guy we can find. Benioff, I think, is just going to keep going up. Someone to watch. Read Hastings. I highly recommend reading his book, The No Rules Rules. That will teach you how to do one of the things that I want to talk about today, which is culture. Satya Nadella has done some really interesting work at Microsoft, especially with the growth mindset. That was one of the big changes when he started, is like, we got to get away from this competitive mindset where it's, just trying to beat your competitor at Microsoft, and get into the growth mindset, admitting mistakes, being open about things. There's not a lot of women on this list. So, we're dominated by the tech guys, the tech bros to some extent. Look, these folks are top innovators, and I do see a chat comment, so I'm going to speak up. We need more women on that list. I could not agree with you more. And that's going to be part of this presentation, is talking about how can we bring women more into the fold. So these two guys, we know their companies. I don't need to say anything about them. We know what they're doing in terms of innovation at Tesla. And it's impressive. It's strategic innovation. Bezos, the business model is just unbelievable, what he's created with Amazon Prime, etc. And Tesla, one of the most valuable companies in the world. We could debate whether it really should be that valuable. That's a different story. But those two are not people I totally admire. I'm not sure if you're really familiar with Mark Benioff. I'm sure you all heard of him, co-CEO, co-founder of Salesforce. This guy is someone to watch. And the reason I'm slowing down a little bit with him is because he has a value-based leadership style that is, I think, a lot more forward-thinking than what we might have seen with Bezos and with Musk, for example, who are, to say the least, problematic in how they deal with the human element at their company. But Benioff really is a value-driven leader, and he's getting to the top of the heap with the kind of things that they've done. And what did they recently buy? Salesforce just recently bought Slack, I think it was. They're doing a lot of, so, considered one of the greatest leaders. We're having more emerging leaders. One of the interesting spaces I was reading about, Annabelle Huang, is crypto. And she's really, Web 3.0, she's really quite a leader in that area. So I think we might see, because, those other leaders are at the top of a company, right? That kind of pyramid. But this whole blockchain is a little bit more decentralized, meant to be more decentralized. We'll see how it all works out. It's meant to take away some of the power from the established companies, and that may very well be a way for women to emerge. Right, but we're starting at the top. Yes, Ronald, you're absolutely right. So actually, you are setting me up for my, that is my model. Thank you, Ronald. It's not just at the top. So it started with some of those, kind of headline blockbuster type of people. But yes, it does start at the top. It absolutely starts at the top. And we're going to talk about that today. But we're going to look at these three layers of leadership for innovation. So top management, which we're going to focus on the transformational leadership and their role in creating a climate for innovation. Then we can look at the team level. Specifically, would like to talk about an area that Zarek and I have been doing research, a style of leadership is called ambidextrous leadership. So that's leading at the team level. And then individuals, how do you contribute to the team or as an individual performer? What are some of the aspects of personality? What are some of the diversity aspects? And in particular, today, we're going to talk about some of the research on women in innovation. And I can just give you a little bit of a, it's a mixed bag. There's a lot of difficulties there, and it needs attention. And I think that's one of the things we're going to talk about today. So this is, yes, we started at the top with those big folks up there, but this is a more holistic discussion where it's talking, the top management is responsible for the organizational innovation, exploration, exploitation, the climate, all those things, and we'll talk in detail on that. And then you get the team trying to implement those or sometimes come up with the new ideas. And then you want to empower the individuals and individual innovation. One of the things that I do corporate trainings, and one of the areas that I'm getting asked to do a lot more is in strategic thinking. And people want to understand, no matter what level of the organization they're working at, how can you adopt that strategic mindset? And of course, strategy and innovation are very closely linked. If you're really doing strategy, in my mind, you got to be innovating. You got to have that entrepreneurial orientation to create new possibilities. So let's get into some of the research. And so this is a research model that Zurek and I put together and tested. And this is an article, and I'm going to walk you through it a little bit. And this is an article that, at least the initial part, is an article that we published with the European Journal of Innovation Management. And that one's been cited a whole bunch of times in the last, during the pandemic, et cetera. I think we're up to close to 200 on that. So it's generating a lot of interest. And I think there's some worthy areas of research to be extended here and some real practical implications. So part of this model, Zurek was very ambitious when he first started doing his doctoral work, and this came from that doctoral work, and it was very well grounded in this basic model. And you see the 3 layers. I love the chat. Let's see. Okay. So the first layer is those Musks and, and Bezos, this CEO role, right? So the CEO has a primary role in driving innovation, but it turns out they can do that a couple of different ways. And one is through the climate, creating a culture of innovation, a culture that supports innovation. And we'll talk about that today. And also directly influencing employees, co-workers to innovate themselves, either through teams or individually. And so we were interested to look at what's the difference between the direct influence of the leader and the indirect influence of the environment. We can look at that. And then we wanted to look at this team innovation, which is using a different model, because leading at the team level is different. Of course, you can be transformational at your team level as well, but there's a new approach that's called ambidextrous leadership, the right foot and the left foot, and being able to take 2 different approaches and combine them, which is the opening behaviors and closing behaviors. And that leads to greater team innovation. We'll talk about that. And then finally, there's some research that we've done looking at the personality traits. Now, I'm going to share with you today some interesting, I believe they're interesting. Hopefully you do too. Oh, and please jump in at any time. I mean, there's the chat, but you can also unmute if you wanted to engage with me. I'm very flexible leadership style, I guess you would say, which is the topic of my presentation today. So the personality traits, there's some interesting, it's the big 5. We looked at the big 5, which I'm sure you were all familiar with. OCEAN is the acronym. There's some interesting relationships between different personality traits and leadership. And you can do some interesting things with that. Like, it's definitely worthwhile looking at. And at the same time, it's really about that's just one piece of the puzzle. It's really about creating a culture that empowers a large group of people with the whole range of those big 5 personality traits, but you can do some interesting things of pairing some different personality traits to get kinds of results. So these are the main topics that I'm going to cover today. And I will do a little bit more of a deep dive in terms of diversity on the women leadership and what's the story there. All right, so let's start with transformational leadership. So this is the big headline news about leadership, and especially at the top management level. So it's incontrovertible. It's proven in our study, but hundreds of other studies, that the transformational leadership at the top of the organization leads to greater innovation, and that's both exploration and exploitation, and we'll talk about that. So I want to spend a little time, do a little bit of a deep dive on this topic of transformational leadership. There's a ton of research on this, and by the way, the book that I mentioned that I'm writing, which is Authentic Leadership, I am seeing authentic leadership as the next step from transformational, but that will be the next presentation. So what is a transformational leader? The big word with transformational is vision. The transformational leader has a vision, communicates that vision, inspires other people with that vision, gets people to go above and beyond because they're inspired. And one of the things about a transformational leader, not to be confused with the charismatic leader, you can have a situation where you have a charismatic leader, which means there's that sense of emotion. The leader stirs up a lot of emotion. It could be anger, it could be whatever that is, but that's not transformational necessarily, because the transformational piece is really about change, about creating change, about inspiring people to go to a higher level, but it really does involve moral values. So the charismatic leader may have, some moral values to move things forward, or they may not. Transformational leader needs to lead from those values. So let's go into a little bit more detail on that one. So a transactional leader, think of a transactional leader, maybe you know all this already because you're very sophisticated folks. So transactional leader, think about The Godfather or something, I'll give you this, you do this for me, I'll give you that reward. It's a carrot and stick type of thing. And it's about making deals and making side deals and all that. The transformational leader is really about an emotional connection with the followers, an intellectual connection, a moral connection with the followers that really leads to change and leads to people going above and beyond because they're just so inspired. It's about inspiring people with a vision. And that's where you see someone like, in my view, Mark Benioff. Clearly someone like Musk has inspired with a vision as well. So a little bit more about what transformational leadership. So transformational leaders are, it's a two-way street. This is the type of leadership. This is what we call third wave leadership in leadership studies. This is a relational leadership construct because it's about the back and forth between the followers and the leader, the co-workers. I don't even like the word followers because it implies a hierarchy that I think is not necessarily the best way to look at it. So I should have substituted co-workers. I usually do. And it's about this emotional connection. And it's also that things are done with a sense of justice and morality in the organization. That's where I think, folks like Elon Musk and Bezos kind of fall short on that. And we need to do better in that. And I think Benioff's a better example. Okay, the 4 I's of transformational leadership: idealized influence, inspirational motivation, individual consideration, and intellectual stimulation. So the idea of idealized influence is the idea that the leader holds values, has these values that are embodied in the leader. So, when we saw that incident with, I don't know if you ever saw the video, but when you saw that incident with Travis Kalanick from Uber back in the day when he, before he got let go as CEO, and Koushner Rakami seems to be doing a much better job. You see him, yelling while he was obviously under the influence of alcohol, drugs, whatever, got in a cab. Not a cab, sorry, an Uber. and proceeded to yell at the at the driver, because the guy dared to say, hey, we're not getting paid enough. He was fired shortly afterwards. You have to embody values that are inspiring to others. This was not. This was kind of more like a frat bro type of culture, and we saw that also with WeWorks. WeWorks, they were throwing back the shots at their board meetings, and that just doesn't work in the long run. And you saw what happened with the founder of WeWork, but he got a lot of money when he walked away from that. But he did not hold the values of what could be publicly traded company. Inspirational motivation. Okay, so the idealized influence is the leader embodies the values. Inspirational motivation is that you're able to communicate those high expectations in a way that's energizing, not in a way that like defeats people. Oh, we're never going to achieve this. Individual consideration means that flexibility, you can respond to the individual needs, and there's a genuine sense of concern. That's where I think some of those big innovators and strategists have fallen down and wouldn't fully achieve the transformational leadership. They don't have that genuine sense of concern for their co-workers. And the intellectual stimulation, are the leaders calling you to re-examine your basic assumptions? That's what we do in strategy, right? We're always drilling down to the basic assumptions behind the strategy and being willing to engage on them. I haven't been looking at the chat, so if there is anything, hopefully it pops up. So the transformational leader has that intellectual stimulation, is provocative. It's interesting, when you do strategy, you got to be a little provocative and push people back on them, on themselves to rethink what they're actually basing their decisions and their actions on. So these are some of the characteristics of a transformational leader: adapts quickly and easily to change, intentionally builds networks that creates that atmosphere of collaboration, motivates and sets the vision. It's really about a vision. If there's no vision, then you're not really engaged in transformational leadership. And again, this is most important at the top of the organization, and strives to be proactive and not reactive. That's the definition of a strategic approach. So you can basically say that if you want to, I'm pretty confident on this finding, you can basically say that if you are not seeing transformational leadership at the top, at the CEO team, the co-CEO, whatever the scenario is with the top executives, then this is not a company that's going to have sustainable innovation in the long run. And I think that's where you see a company like Meta running into a lot of trouble. Clearly the values aren't there. The vision, nobody's really buying that vision of Ocular that Facebook is, or no, Meta is spending, billions of dollars on Ocular. I don't think it's going to fly. Well, that, remains to be seen. But Zuckerberg is not a transformational leader. The values aren't there. The vision's not there. Maybe originally he did well with the first innovation, but. So what happens when you have this transformational leadership? Well, it turns out a couple of things happen. A transformational leader definitely leads to exploratory innovation. So exploratory being, I think I have a slide on that. There we go. Exploratory versus exploitation. So exploration versus exploitation. So you see here, the first one, the exploitation, you're taking an idea and you're refining it and, making it better. Now, this is going to be a great strategy because, look at the iPhone. I just recently saw a video with one of my kind of favorite strategy gurus, Scott Galloway, and he said that, now if we stacked all the iPhones, it would go to all the way to the moon, all the iPhones that have been sold in the world. And if the iPhone was its own business, it would be one of the top business, it would be in the top 10 businesses of the world. If the Airpods now, so the iPhone, whatever we are, 12, 13 or something, is definitely that exploitation. Probably you folks know all this, where you're refining incremental improvements, etc. The exploration is those wild ideas, totally different, like, Netflix, when they first came out, is a classic example of that. And that of those many ideas, one of them becomes this sort of blockbuster hit. Another example is the Airpods, right? So the Airpods, again, if it was its own company, would be in the top 10 companies in the world. So this is the Airpod, I would argue, is exploration. I think the Airpod will be the precursor to something that Apple will do in the sort of metaverse. It's going to be so much better than what, for example, Meta is doing with these Oculus. It's kind of a strange thing. So let's go back now that we've talked about exploration, exploitation. So the transformational leadership at the top management level, which is what we're talking right now, leads to this exploration, exploitation. That's the direct effect, and we have an indirect effect, which is climate. And so creating a climate for innovation. So in some ways, the climate, what's one of the things I'd like to leave you with today as takeaways, although we have much more to cover, but is the idea that the climate becomes a huge driver of innovation in the company. And we'll see there's a difference between the exploration, exploitation outcomes for the CEO transformational versus the climate. They have a different influence. So what happens is the culture is more important, at least in our research, Zarek and I's research, is more important in terms of exploration, in terms of those wild new ideas. And the CEO is more influential in terms of exploitation, in terms of this transformational leadership. So Zarek gave me a great understanding of that when we first got the results and we were kind of looking at it together. And one of the things that Zarek suggested is he's like, well, CEO exploitation is, which is very successful, as we said, strategy, is kind of more of a sure thing, Apple, the iPhone 11, the iPhone 12, whatever we're going to 13, I'm sure that'll be a hit too, right? So it's kind of more of a sure bet. So the CEO has, a 3-year contract. They got to deliver results, right? They're not necessarily wanting to put themselves in that more risky position. So the CEO may use their transformational leadership to drive to those exploitation results, which will give them the quarterly results that they're looking for, and they'll to put those wins up on the scoreboard in a reasonable period of time. Exploration is much more risky. Now, in that case, it is the culture. And we think about the culture, I think one of the great kind of metaphors is, the goldfish in the goldfish bowl, right? The culture is the water surrounding the goldfish. So the exploration innovation comes from having a culture where people are having those conversations. People are interacting from different areas of the company, different functional areas. I don't know if you know the story of Steve Jobs when he was building that kind of beautiful corporate office that's kind of like a spaceship in Cupertino, California. And when he was, being very controlling kind of guy, he was very involved in the nitty-gritty of the design. And one of the things he wanted to do was he wanted to only have 2 bathrooms in the whole building, one male, one female, so that everybody would have to converge in the bathroom and, collide and have those conversations. So don't say the big takeaway from my presentation today is that we need, get more people in the same bathroom. No, but the idea was this interaction, this random conversations. Oh, what are you working on? What are you working on? And creating that culture. So culture is more effective than CEO leadership in creating exploration. Now, in order to have a culture of innovation, one that is supportive of innovation, you need to have that transformational leadership, because that transformational, that idealized influence, that intellectual stimulation, that collaborative spirit, that moral direction creates that culture of exploration. So I'm not saying the leadership is not important. It has an indirect effect in creating the culture. But in terms of the exploration, those hit it out of the park products, and business models, we have found that the culture has a stronger role than the CEO, which makes sense, right? Because the CEO is at top of the organization. You're not necessarily interacting with them on a daily basis. Again, the water that the goldfish is in, you're swimming in that culture every day, and everything you do can be influenced by that. Are there any thoughts or comments? Does anyone want to jump in at this point? That's one of our major findings in terms of the top management. I'm going to talk a little bit more about culture, but any questions or thoughts at this point, or are we all good?
I think, Louise, this is very provocative, where you are actually saying something that often is the culture starts with the leader. And now we're saying cultures in the organization. And every move of a leader is actually emulated and replicated by everybody else. And so now this separation, as you're putting it, is going to be, it's still hard to manage. It's ambidextrous organization type of stuff. So I'm really intrigued on how to make it real. I understand what you're saying, but leaders are so powerful, and the way they act and behave drives all the culture. So just I think it's very provocative. So thank you for sharing that, and it's making me think.
Okay, great. I love being provocative. As strategy people, we love provoking. So that's wonderful. Thank you, Hitendra. Let me share this. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the actual culture. So we've talked about those two different types. So the leader indirectly influences innovation through the culture. So that is something that, I mean, cultures are not that easy to change, to design. It's a process, but at the same time, the leader has to be thinking about, am I creating a culture that supports innovation? So let's take a look at that. And as we said, you know, this is just the regression here, but you can see that there's a very strong influence directly, and then an indirect influence through the mediation of organizational culture. So what does it mean to create a climate for innovation? Innovation as a way of life in the organization. Let me continue here. So let's just take a minute here and just, you can even close your eyes if you want to, and just think in your mind's eye of a time that something that you did that you felt was one of your most sort of creative moments, a program. I mean, maybe it was when COVID hit and this global network was launched. Maybe that was a moment for Hitendra and the folks at GIMI. I'll share with you one of my, when I think of, hey, what did I do? I like to think of myself as innovative. What was something that was a high level in terms of hitting it out of the park with innovation? So I'll give you an example in my life. I started a program at my former university, which was a NAFTA program. And we took, I just designed it, you know, when you're young, you've got all these ideas, so much energy. And the youth, you know, when you're in your 30s, and I do see a hand, so we will go to that. When you're young, you're just kind of throwing off ideas. It's that fluid intelligence. Later in life, you get more the integrative intelligence. And I'm going to talk about NAFTA, but I do want to, let me see, stop the screen share. Yes, do you have a comment or question? Is it Cristanto? Is that it?
Yes, Cristanto from Jakarta, Indonesia.
Oh,
I love the concept of this transformational leadership. Actually, we invited the speaker from UK some 15 years ago. It's one of the disciples of Professor Bernard Bass, it's Roger Gill. Mm-hmm. But I love the idea, but to dream to have such a transformation leadership in Indonesia, in the country, is somewhat difficult, because your presentation assumes that you are in a free market society, liberal like America, but Indonesia is somewhat different. So when you're talking about climate of innovation,
right?
You said that as if that the CEO can actually create that climate. But here in Indonesia, we are very much dependent on what the policy of the government
Right.
actually direct us because 85% of the intellectual resources by the in Indonesia is actually controlled by the governments. Very
85%.
little from the private enterprises. So I was wondering if there will be one more level on top of the CEO that we need to influence to create the climate. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, and you know, I mean, you definitely see some leadership at the government level that is transformational. You know, I'm thinking of our friend in New Zealand, right? The Jacinda Ardern. She struck me as being very innovative in the way that, and very flexible in her leadership style, and willing to admit mistakes when she made them. And by the way, that is one way that you can promote innovation. I don't know if that's part of the culture in Indonesia that, you know, and I would imagine probably not, right? That leaders are not saying, hey, I got this wrong, let me rethink that. But as we saw with the global pandemic, you have to rethink these decisions so frequently. So yeah, and I mean, what can I say? The whole world is watching Volodymyr Zelensky right now, and the leadership that he is showing. I mean, that's transformational leadership. It's moral, it's inspiring people. So I do think there is a role for the government to be able to do that. I do think that when you look at some, I mean, I've done some teaching in Vietnam. So I had the opportunity to teach 3 different times in Vietnam. And I have to say, you know, I love Vietnam and I love the experience, but I have to say I kind of chafed at some of the attitudes towards innovation. Like, for example, I had, you know, it's an authoritarian structure of the government. So, you know, I had one student who wanted to start a like a website to give people legal information, right, to empower them with legal information, and completely shut down by the Communist Party in Vietnam. They didn't want to, you know, so it is a huge problem. It is a huge problem. And I think that Indonesia is a more perhaps flexible environment. There's a lot of interesting things that are happening, but I do recognize what you're saying. There's some constraints. And we saw that, for example, when you look in China at Jack Ma, this guy's a true innovator, really value-driven guy. What happened, right? He was kind of cut down by the Communist Party in the CPP. So this is a big issue, and I think that governments need to look at ways to support innovation. And I think in the case of China, for example, to me, that was a huge mistake of the CPP to take Jack Ma out. Mm-hmm.
If I may just ask a bit with regard to Vietnam, because you are rightly explain what happened in Vietnam, but there's an exception called VinFast, the auto company. Mm-hmm. That started some few years ago, and suddenly they actually expanded to US and selling their electric cars in US. So how could you explain that? How could that happen? I mean, in such an authoritarian regime, and suddenly there's a big innovation happens, going global in 2-3 years. So how do you explain that?
Right. Well, I think that the constraints that are there, there's always possibilities for you know, breakthrough innovation in the context of those constraints. So I think that, I mean, a perfect example, I mean, not a perfect example, but like a wow example is South Korea. Like, I mean, there is a certain rigidity to the culture that is this kind of baked into the culture. But at the same time, oh my God, hitting it out of the park. I mean, look at the Grammys, BTS, look at the Oscars, the Parasite, look at the car companies, look at the Samsung. I mean, it's unbelievable what they've achieved. Hitendra, did you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, Louise, I just wanted to maybe help you through the presentation. I think you got some slides you wanted to cover. And I think that
you want
point's
me-
being made. Yeah.
Okay.
So I think the point over here is the common question people will always ask is, all this theory doesn't apply to me. And the real point, I agree completely with Dr. Kelly, is this. Guys, we have hierarchical organizations in the United States. We've got people who are really autocratics. We've got people who, cultures which are saying, I'm not going to do anything unless the boss tells me what to do. We have it here, and we have it everywhere. And it may feel that the United States has got more examples of all the successful leaders. It's not true. Every country has them. You just got to figure out how to make it work. And you need to find a way to see. And I'm going to challenge everybody in the audience over here. These are frameworks, and you got to figure out how to apply this framework in your context. These frameworks are being applied in the United States. And in my experience, they represent similar companies in Brazil, Indonesia, Korea, and everywhere else.
Wow.
The US has them. So just be careful as saying that this doesn't apply to us. I would encourage us to be a little bit more flexible and say, how could I apply this thinking? So I'll give the floor back to you, Louise.
Right on. And I will thank you so much. And I will press ahead because I have a lot more to cover. So, but I do love the questions. So back to the example. So the NAFTA example, it was just a high point for me with innovation. We took the students, a small group of students. We went to Canada. We went to the US. So we had Canadian students, American students, Mexican students. We traveled through the 3 countries. We did projects with, Bombardier in Quebec, Bombardier, I guess you say in English. And then that's my hometown, so I speak French. And then, Walmart, Mexico. So this was a great moment for me of, just kind of breakthrough innovation. And there's some interesting, I will get to that chat in a minute. It's a little, so what was driving that? It was my sense of autonomy, that I had a strong sense of autonomy. I am a kind of NAFTA poster child because I, grew up in Canada. I'm actually from Scotland originally. And I was working in the US, and I had spent a good 10 years doing research and consulting in Mexico, and I'm quite fluent in Spanish. I'm going to read some of these. These are quite interesting here. Let's see what Leonardo says. They don't know that. They think it might be expensive. That it can be expensive innovation, and it's very risky. And you have to think about the budget. Absolutely. You can find 2 to 3 people to innovate. And I'm going to talk about how to create networks and how to respond to competitors. I like that. That's very helpful. So sense of freedom, challenging work, management, encouragement to innovate. So this is an important piece. I had a president of my former university, and he believed in my vision. So I had a sponsor in top management. Support for teamwork. I ended up doing a lot of it myself. Tolerance for errors. That's probably one of the #1 things that that if you want to create a climate for innovation, let people fail, encourage people to fail, celebrate failure. This is that work that Brene Brown does about braving. You really want to allow people, and that was the work that Satya Nadella did at Microsoft. He said, first thing we got to do is get the growth mindset, because we can't rely on just looking our best and competing with everybody. We got to also say, hey, I screwed up here. I fell on my face here. Here's why. Let's look at it. How can I do better? The sort of after action report. Yes, Carlos.
Well, congratulations. Very good presentation. Now, just a very quick question.
Yes.
Considering that we are moving from closed innovation to open innovation, more like you mentioned Salesforce, they do a lot of open innovation, as you mentioned. Mm-hmm. How this will change the culture of innovation, because this requires openness of the mind, not invented here, so and so, this kind of thing. Does it change the style of leadership required for open innovation? Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. I think it requires a very flexible leadership style, because by definition, when you are dealing with another entity, another company, a competitor, a supplier, whatever, opening yourself up, the organization up in that way requires a very flexible leadership style. Now, I think the key to that is creating networks of innovation, which ultimately networks, I mean, you can look at the node as the company, but what's more important is the people and creating that cross-fertilization of ideas across companies. And look, I couldn't agree with you more, Carlos. I mean, this exploration, right? Those sort of moonshot type of things. You need partners. You can't do that alone anymore. You have to get into partnership to be able to make that work. And I think the ultimate example of a kind of and why is Apple I think Apple now is the most valuable company in the world is, I mean, the key was creating the apps, right? So the apps are not produced by Apple. We all know this story. It's a blockbuster story, but it's create this network that now Apple gets to charge 30%, which I don't agree with. It's too much. But so they co-created that innovation by letting people in, and it was hard for Apple to do that initially because they didn't want to let others in. But Steve Jobs kind of got over that hump, and he is a famous control freak, but was able to, but I really think it's about creating networks across those organizations. Now I see another chat, so let's take a look at the chat. I could go on for hours on this, so I don't know, we finish at 7 or 7 a.m.
Louise, why don't we do this, if you don't mind, if you want to finish your slides, then we'll get the spaces on, and then we'll do Q&A after that.
Perfect. Okay, so let's get back to it. And you know what? And one of the great, I mean, I'm a strategy person, but one of the great things about strategy is you should be concise. And it's not my strong point. Okay, because I love getting into all the, okay, so now I'm going down to the next level, which is the team level. Okay, so this is where how to lead high-performing teams. And I'm going to speed up through a few because I think we understand the relationship between innovation and creativity, right? So innovation is creativity plus implementation. So it's those wild ideas, but then it's actually making something happen, which requires a different type of discipline, a different kind. And I think some of this will be interesting for that open innovation concept. And you'll see how that applies in a minute. So here's where, so sort of blockbuster takeaway from the first part of the presentation is transformational leadership at the top leads to exploration, exploitation, and also leads to climate for innovation. Now we're dropping down to the team level. What works here? It's a different type of leadership, right? So the one that is most effective at the team level for producing innovation is ambidextrous leadership, and specifically opening and closing behaviors. So let's talk about that. So ambidextrous, I always like to think of the, I guess you could think of the hands, but I like to think of the feet, you know, the left foot and the right foot. So we need both to get us forward. You can also think of the yin yang. That would be, that symbol is a great way to think about ambidextrous leadership. So the main takeaway with ambidextrous leadership at the team level is that you need to have the left foot and the right foot. You need to be able to alternate two different styles. So the opening behavior style is that, you know, very blue sky thinking, you know, questioning. If you know Chris Argyris's idea of the, oh geez, I just forgot what they call it, the double loop learning. Chris Argyris's concept of double loop learning, where you're questioning the basic assumptions. So you're given a task as a team, you don't accept the task. You question the task. Is this the right solution? Is this the right problem? Is this the right way to do it? Are there different ways to go for it? Can you do that experimentation? Letting people think independently within the team and figure things out themselves, giving room for people to play with ideas, letting people make errors, encouraging learning. And I see some chats there, so I'm going to jump in with the chats. Okay, great. Thank you. I'm glad you like that, David. So that is that opening behavior, that exploration, that blue sky thinking. And guess what? It is costly because it costs time. You don't kind of like pedal to the metal. We're going to make this happen. We're going to knock it out. No, the opening behavior is that sort of almost that philosophical, hey, is this the right question? Is this the right approach? Should we be looking at this differently? What if we turned this upside down? What if we combined this with that? That's that kind of thinking. It's very open-ended. It's very uncertain. it can be uncomfortable for a lot of people to be in that space. That's the space I'm very comfortable in, but I'm very open to new experience. So that kind of maps onto that. So that is that necessary ingredients for the team to be innovative. Now, but that's not the creativity plus implementation. So the creativity is that part, the opening behavior. The implementation is what we call needs this closing behavior. You actually have to, set goals specific. At some point, you have to say, this is what we're going to try. This is our best. I always like the idea of a strategic hypothesis that can be proven or unproven by pursuing it. So you set goals, you establish routines, you give people roles within the team, you stick to the plan. And yeah, maybe there is some sanctioning of errors at that point, because you're like, we need to make this happen. This needs to be, we have to have short-term wins. One of the things with leadership for innovation is you want to create short-term wins because it's fatiguing, right? People need to have a sense of motivation. So this closing behavior, you can think of it as almost like bureaucratic leadership to some extent, because what has bureaucracy done for us? It gives us accountability, and that's what you have in the closing behavior. But you can't skip that opening behavior step. So what the research suggests is you need both in a team leader, and a team leader has to be able to switch from that opening behavior into the closing behavior when they get to the implementation part. And there's different kind of outcomes. There's different modes that the teams can come up with in terms of their innovation contribution. And this is a kind of interesting 2x2 where you look at investment. Is that first mover, your goal is that first mover advantage. The improvement is more like that exploitation. Imagination is that totally novel concept that nobody, the Cirque du Soleil type of breakthrough concept. And then the incubation can be a different kind of creativity where you're trying to create a team that is continually supportive. So these are some examples of different types of tasks that the different innovation teams could be working on. So basically, leading teams for innovation, you have to have those two pieces, the opening behavior and the closing behavior. And there has to be like a fluid switching, like you see in the yin yang, where you're dovetailing from the opening behavior, which, as the term suggests, opening should be at the beginning. It can be brought out at different stages in the team, but you should start with the opening behavior. And this is something that gets me to my last main topic is individuals, and what are the roles of individuals? And in particular, what are some of the findings we have for women in innovation? So the story is a mixed bag of what we see with women. And so specifically, when we looked at, Zarek and I, in our research, when we looked at, I'm going to go back, when we looked at the women team leads, we found that the female team leads were having less innovation outcomes at the team level than the male team leads. And we're going to go back to this one here, the opening behavior and closing behavior. So when we did a deep dive, when Zarek and I did a deep dive on that, we found that the women were not engaged in the opening behavior to the greater extent that the male team leads. So they had a much lower average on opening behavior, and they had either the same or slightly higher average on closing behavior. So we were discouraged by that, but also encouraged, because science is science, and the data leads you on a path of discovery. And what we found is there is an argument that in some ways women, through other studies, are actually slightly more innovative than men. But what we found was it was really about the climate in the organization for the women leaders. And what happens is, in companies where men and women are treated more egalitarian, more equally, there is a higher level of innovation in general, and the females are more on par with males in terms of innovation. But what you have is you have a gendered environment where women are given, there is a scenario where you can fail your way up in an organization, okay? But that is not common for women, okay? You got that one chance to lead, better not blow it, okay? So the women are under an intense pressure to perform. And again, when you think about the exploration-exploitation mix, the exploitation is more of the sure bet. So what we found was the women in a gendered organizational environment were skipping the opening behavior because it's too risky, there's too much chance for failure, and going straight to the closing behavior. But that's not going to get you the high level of innovation. So this big takeaway for helping women to perform at a higher level in innovation within organizations, because we know that women in the entrepreneurial space can be very successful with that. And I think, but within the organization, you have to create more gender equality in the firm that allows women to fail at the same rate as men and still be considered leaders. So let me see what the chat says here. Okay, thank you, Enrique. I'm glad you were able to stay for this part. So a couple of things, and then we can kind of end. I had some practical stuff, but I think we can do more of the discussion than the practical stuff. So, okay, so leaders at the top level who are willing to change based on women's input can have a higher rate of breakthrough ideas. And so you want to get those women leaders at the top management level who can give that advice. Women should be in the CEO positions, and that leads to more innovation. I want to put up Maya Angelou. We started with the African-American woman. We're ending close to African with Maya Angelou's quote. You can't use up creativity. The more you use, the more you have. So I think that's where the more you can create these networks that support, again, it's a climate for innovation. So we vis-a-vis women leaders, you have to create a more egalitarian climate in the organization where women don't feel that they have this one chance to succeed, and if they screw it up, that's the end of that. Okay. And Hitendra, how are we doing with time? Should I talk about the big five or leave that for another day?
Let's save this for another day, because
Okay.
you've provoked us with some pretty good topics already. And
Okay.
when we get into some Q&A or maybe some role play. Let me see if Ron is here. Is Ron available on this thing? All right. So Ron's not available. That's okay. So let's just do a quick role play over here. Louise, I'm gonna be the CEO.
I could do some.
Excellent. So let's add good old professor from Calgary. We'll act as consultants. So Professor Bob Schultz, professor at Calgary in business. And I'll play.
So I know Sharon Samoe and Pedro Marquez are they're on your LinkedIn's. So let's go.
Okay. So Bob and Louise, you guys are going to be consultants, advisors, using the theory that you've put together, that you've shared with us. So Bob, support the theory and the framework presented by Louise. And I'm going to be the difficult CEO who's basically saying, hey, innovation's hard. You guys are asking me to do this, but I'm going to balance the current business and the future business. And my current business is dominating my thinking, and my shareholders are demanding near-term results. And I've got to make sure those numbers are there. And if I create this explorations, the kind of stuff, it's a lot of money that's wasted, and that money does not show on the bottom line. And if I don't do it, I'm probably better off in terms of my results.
Do you want
to?
I could jump in to address that, and then maybe Bob can jump in.
You guys are a team. Please act like a team.
So Bob, do you want to go first, or should I?
Sure. Okay, so Mr. CEO, how serious are you about winning? Are you just in this game just to kind of play around, or you really want to win? Because if you really want to win, You got to put all the players on the field. If you only have half the players on the field, which are males, then you're giving up half the ball game. What do you want to do here?
Bob, I'm a little offended by your tone. You are lecturing me. I would rather you coach me.
Okay.
But I'm going to listen to Louise because I think she might be able to handle me better. Louise, can you help me through this conversation?
Let's see what I can do. Okay.
Double T. Get you over the head, Louise, clean up. That's good.
Well, you know what? That was one of my personality things is you get the neurotic with the agreeable.
I don't have time for your conversation, guys. Get me my messages.
Okay. All right. So what I want to do is I want to tell you this. I want to validate your concern because you are absolutely right. You are going to lose money on the bottom line in the short term. Okay. So your quarterly results may not look as good as you want them to look. You could do better with your quarterly results in the short term, but what we're doing today is ensuring the long run survival of the firm. Do you want to be Blockbuster or do you want to be Netflix? Okay. Blockbuster is bankrupt with one left in the United States. Netflix is going gangbusters. They have their problems in streaming. You have to trade off some short-term results for long-term survival.
I understand what you're saying, Louise, and certainly we don't want to be dinosaurs and disappearing. That's not our objective, and we are not there. We are growing incrementally and we're surviving. What my concerns are the following. I'll open up my organization for innovation. I say, let's create a culture of this growth mindset and open. And next second, every person is not available for our day-to-day business. They're not available. They're saying, I'm working on this new thing. I'm working on this new thing. I'm not available for this meeting. And this closing part, the closing part that you talked about, has made us excellent. The opening part creates all kinds of chaos and disturbance, and it's almost impossible to manage. And everyone will say, you told me to innovate, and that's what I'm doing. How do I manage these people?
Okay, so let me we'll do 1-2 here, Louise.
Yeah.
So Mr. CEO Hitendra, obviously there's other people inside the organization that you've already identified, which are really pretty good, which are innovative. Have you thought about getting them networked up together? Have you kind of built an ecosystem inside the company and also outside the company?
That's not my problem. My problem is my good, hardworking guys, people. If I give them too much space for innovation, they will innovate and they'll do all the right things, but then they'll give me excuses of why they're missing a meeting or not available, or they're spending their time doing something else. I would like them to spend 90% of the time on core business, maybe 10% on innovation. That 10% creeps into 30, 40% very quickly. The bad behavior of innovation saying, I can think and I can walk around in blue sky and all that kind of great stuff, and I can't manage them anymore.
So one of the things that I would suggest is to look at the core business and protecting the core business and innovating around that core. So you do have different talents in your organization, and the people who are very high on conscientiousness, those are the people who kind of get their head down, do the work. They want a clear path. They're high on certainty. You have to keep them keeping the core going while you have these wild characters.
I like that.
Able to do.
Louise, I like that a lot. I mean, I think this is what Bob was saying also, is find those networks of innovators and maybe double down on those guys, individuals, and maybe separate out who's going to be doing this more blue sky and open-ended thinking versus the people who need to be convergent. So it's not the whole company, perhaps, but you're basically saying there's parts of the companies that are better configured to do that. So I like that. I have a question for you, though. It feels to me that 90% of the people we have hired in our companies don't really want to do open-ended stuff. They get scared. They don't want. You said so in your results about the women you studied.
Yeah.
That they've got a propensity to move towards convergent thinking. So I believe that's true for 90% of all our employees. And now we put them in this uncomfortable situation saying, go diverge. And they will look at me like, you're crazy. How do I make my convergent thinkers to suddenly embrace divergent thinking and not going to suddenly feel that I hate my job and I'm going to quit and leave, go join another company?
So one of the things that happens in meetings is that you have lots of meetings in your company. So one of the things I did with one company was I said, when you have meetings, if you put convergent people in the meetings, they want to get done and move on. So what you could ask people to do at the beginning is to do what a company called IXL does. And they say, generate 5 ideas and then figure out of those 5 ideas, which one is the best. And what happens with many people in companies is to have one idea and say, oh, that sounds good. We'll go with your idea. We're done. And I'll move on to my things. And then what you do is then you capture those 5 ideas, because 4 or 5 of them could be used for something else. So you can build an internal database of ideas that people can go back and look at. That company is called Milliken. And if you've used I can help you with an instrument called the Gregoric Style Delineator. And what you want is you want to try to find concrete randoms inside your organization if you can, because they're the people that actually.
Bob, I don't understand what you're saying. I'm a CEO. I need to be able to take actions. Right. So help me with what you just said. What you're saying is, I can take my convergent thinkers
and ask them to develop 5 ideas at each meeting of how to solve identify what the problem is or opportunity, generate 5 ideas, and then pick the best one where they want to go, but save the other 4 because it might work for something else. And it would only take about, maybe 30 seconds to just document them. You have flip charts and you have the sticky notes and other kinds of things. But what happens in many companies is they throw away the good ideas because they picked one, but it might work in a different part of your organization, and spread them around, make it available for people.
Well, I like this thing called brainstorming and all that. Our experience has been that after we put all those Post-its on the wall, we all leave thinking we did all our work and then nothing happens. And when you guys mentioned about implementation as a big important component, we get all this generation, and then everybody says somebody else's job. And really the real innovation is in the implementation. That's where 90% of all the hard labor is, all the hard work is. So Louise, any thoughts on that?
Yes, I do. I do have some thoughts on that. So there are differences in the talent pool, and I can give you 2 indicators, Hitendra, that will help you to unleash those people who are going to be your high innovators, which I agree with you are going to be a smaller percentage, but they're going to be like the yeast in the dough, right? They're going to be the ones who get the thing started. 2 characteristics you want to look for: extroverts, okay? And people who are high, open to new experience. So those are the people who are learning new languages, traveling, trying all these things. They're going to be your innovators. They have the latest gadgets, etc. Those are the ones open to new experience. They want to go overseas and work. Those ones are going to be your higher innovators. And also extroverts. Why extroverts? Extroverts have large networks. They talk to a lot of people inside the organization and outside. So those type of people who are extroverted and very open to new experience, this is one of the keys. Do not manage them bureaucratically. Okay, do not. That will be like, the goose, killing the goose with the golden egg, right? You got to unleash them. People like me, you can't, they have high autonomy. You can't. So let those sort of rock star innovators kind of run with their stuff. And then let the people who are agreeable, conscientious, put their head down, work in teams, get things done. That's going to be the majority. And they're going to do the implementation part, because you have to unleash that. And I agree with what Bob's saying about the meetings. First of all, as CEO, you and your team need to set innovation goals. You have to be clear. This is what percentage of revenue we want to come from new products. And by the way, those should be products within the last 3 years. Okay. So you should set a ambitious that you can live with, because I hear you're worried. Okay. An ambitious but reasonable for you, your company, innovation goal that comes from the top. And then you get your team leaders to unleash those people who are very extroverted and open to new experience. Those ones kind of run with things. And then you get the people who are conscientious and agreeable to kind of circle them and get the thing done, because they can't put that level of anxiety and uncertainty.
Okay, look, let me ask the other question, which I thought you guys provoked very nice, was unleashing the power of women in our organization. Clearly, the population is 50-50, male, female. Our consumer markets are 50-50. We know that on one side, but the decision-making of all big purchases in society are led by women. Women influence the purchase of the house, the car, the kids' tuition, every single thing out there, which is big ticket item, is female. But we are struggling in terms of increasing the talent pool, increasing the number of women in our organizations. What are the things that we are doing? And this is a lecture. I want to lecture on this one. What are the things we CEOs are doing which are somehow stopping females from moving up into the pool, or also at the same time them feeling safe to be able to take this risky discussions of we should try to do this or that, and not be seen as a problem as we often think about the general notion of innovation. I want to know how we can get women in our leadership teams, and how do we get women in our innovation teams, and how do we make it safe for them?
I think the woman should go first in this question or answer.
Okay, there we go. Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. I think it really starts with mindset. And I think one of the things that, and it starts at the top. Okay, so you're the perfect person. Even though being male, you are the perfect person because you're at the top and you're asking this question. That's the good start as you're asking the question. Next, you have to examine the biases in the organization. I could give you some Alice Eagley's work. Women are stuck between a rock and a hard place. If they're too nurturing and supportive of their team, oh, you're just being women. If they're too agentic, what we call agentic, trying to get things done, oh, the B word comes out, this is not a nice person. Okay, you have to have conversations about that women are dealing with an unfair, they lose either way. If they're supportive, they lose. If they're agentic, they lose. It's a lose-lose situation for women leaders. That has to be recognized. That has to be talked about. That bias has to, now I'll give you an example. In the Obama administration, they recognized the research that women, and every woman on this call will validate this. When women speak up in a meeting, it is not heard, okay? One of the best things that you can do is to reinforce women's contributions. So what did the Obama administration in their meetings do? They had the talking stick, and they would pass the talking stick. Now it sounds hokey and everything else. Oh my God, do we really need this? Yes, we do. Okay, that's one thing, is to recognize that the floor time is the women are not getting the floor time, and make that concrete with a symbol in the meeting. Secondly, women's voices need to be supported. So you need to make a deliberate choice that when women make a contribution in the meeting, other women or other men echo what they have said. That bolsters that. And then the other thing is, the last thing, and I'll pass it to my colleague, but the other thing is the acceptance of failure. There has to be an explicit recognition that women are punished more for failure than men. And that has to be a conversation that happens. So women have to understand that, oh, you know what? You get more latitude to fail. So
I love the suggestion. The talking stick is just for the audience. They used to use this in villages in Africa. And when they would have the meeting, it was a stick and everybody got a chance to speak. And if you had the stick, everybody else needed to shut up if you didn't have the stick. Mm-hmm. And they rotate the stick around, and the mic to speak, all that. And I think it's a fantastic way to say, we are listening to you, number one, but you also have the floor to speak. So I like that. And we tend to interrupt each other. We talk over each other. And there's a bad behavior in general amongst all of us where we do that. And then, of course, supporting people as they speak. I think I'm going to wrap this part for an open question from everybody else, but I want to just make one point. In my experience, we've been trying to hire people for a long time in innovation, and our research has shown that some of the best innovation directors and leaders in companies are females. And what we found is, from Marissa Myers or from Permastery Warrior, and there's a list of them at Merck, and there's a list of them at Motorola, and all these great companies. And these women who got to the top in what I would call engineering companies, and they did really well over there. And part of it was the fact that they were ambidextrous by definition. They were supportive and encouraging. They were collaborative, and those are the natural skills of innovation. But there was a time about 10 years ago, we noticed that even 30, 40, 50% of those roles were being filled by females. The females were doing a better job in innovation management, innovation direction, because somehow you had to let other people take credit sometimes. And that was something women were probably experienced in doing that much better than guys was able to do, or whether they were able to build networks to bring people together. Whatever it was, there were certain inherent skills that had driven this results that we saw. Now we need to somehow highlight them more in your research, Louise, if you can. And maybe do a study on all the women innovators who are in the world and make a list and say, what are their characteristics? What makes them succeed? And they're going to be the characteristics of all innovation directors. But why is there a disproportional amount of women who are doing so much better when they take these roles?
Yeah, I would say the number one reason is the collaborative leadership style. And when we talked about creating collaborative networks, a climate for innovation that's within the company and also outside. So women are better at the collaborative, drawing people into a network rather than the hierarchy.
Let me wrap, Bob, Professor Schultz, thank you very much for your consulting.
Okay, wait, just one more summary here. Mr. CEO, there are conferences which have women entrepreneurs that are presenting. I think if you looked at who the speakers were, I found some of those speakers had products and services that would fit with your company, and bring them in as outside speakers in your company. You might find some women inside your organization and men that would say, wow, that's an interesting thing that we could add to our revenue. We wouldn't have to do all the heavy lifting because these women have already done that. And I said that's something that wouldn't cost you very much. It'd be easy to do.
That's great. Dr. Schultz, Dr. Kelly, thank you for advising. We're going to open the floor up for everybody else to ask questions. And then we'll wrap this thing up in another 5 minutes.
Okay.
Q&A for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Good closing behavior.
Thanks. Question for people in the audience that you've been dying to ask and we haven't got the question out yet. Anybody? That was a great role play, Louise. I thought it was fun.
It was a lot of fun. It really opened things up. So I like that. That's opening behavior. That's
Louise, as we wait for questions, if there's no questions, there is one thing that I believe that all of the academic research and others are not paying attention to. I'm going to highlight some opportunity areas for research.
I got notebook here, Hitendra.
There was a great book written called Innovation Juggernauts or Innovation Breakthroughs. And they studied innovation at 3M, Motorola, Sony, and everywhere else. And they found again and again that it was two people who somehow fought against the grain and pushed against every reason why they should have been successful or not. They got the post-it out or they got the better video out. And it wasn't the culture that helped them. The culture was actually just defying them all the time. But it was two people who were resilient, persistent, patient, fighting, passionate, and somehow they made that happen. So that's the story of that we must talk about, because it's those stories that we're telling everybody else we should replicate. But should we not find those two people in our companies and do something? There's one topic is very specific around that.
I could jump in on that. I actually have some ideas on that. I think when you look at two people is also the formula for starting successful companies, right? So you have the Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak. This is the classic example. So Wozniak is get your head down and knock out the motherboard or whatever he was doing, right? And then Jobs is, it's going to be, wildly, insanely exciting. So you see that complementary skill set. You saw that at Honda as well. Honda, having the design, having the business sense, the finance sense, and then you have the design. So I do think that's a great combination. I live in Hollywood, the Hollywood land here, in the Hollywood Hills, and I was talking with a guy who works for, major, budget films, feature films, and he does location scouting. And what he does is he combines those two people. One person who's very neurotic and goes in there and stirs things up and makes a mess and provokes people, and then follows the team member, the agreeable team member who smooths it all out. I totally agree with you that combination is.
I think there's a book out. Who are your two people? That's the title of the book. Who are your two people, CEOs? Find them and double down on them. That's the book. Okay, that's one.
Cool.
There's another one which we really take a shortcut on, and we're making this thing feel like it's about liberating people and letting them do what they want to do. But there is a thing called hard work. Hard work. If you ask any of these innovators at the big companies, they worked more than 40 hours a week. They worked 80 hours a week. They came on the weekends, they worked at night and everything else. And somehow we do not seem to be emphasizing that component, that innovation will require people to put the extra hours in, the extra thinking in, and the extra effort, which we have seen all the great geniuses having done. It wasn't just the inspiration and the implementation, and it happened in 2 hours. It was a hell of a lot of work. And now we are asking a lot of people who say, I just want to work 40 hours a week or 8 hours a day. And now you are asking me to do some extraordinary things. No, but I'll say yes, because it's got some fun stuff in there, but I don't want to work. When are we going to talk about, if you really want to innovate, sorry, you have to put the hours in. That's another part of the topic that I would like to emphasize.
So I can address that too. I think that, and at the risk of offending anyone with kind of ageism or whatever, let me say this. We know that the peak of fluid intelligence is at 30 years old.
Oh no.
Okay, no, but there's an integrative intelligence that comes later. That's where we get the wisdom, right? And integrating. So you really want those young, hungry people working on the high innovation projects. And because they are willing to work those 80, 90 hours. Maybe they don't have the kids, the mortgage, or whatever.
But Louise, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is all of our thought leaders on innovation don't talk about the hard work. I'm saying there's a book.
Okay.
You want to innovate, you got to put the hours in. You want to innovate, it doesn't come for free. There is no free on innovation. You have to put the hours in. And so I'm just saying, I would love to see, I never saw Larry Keeley talk about this. I never saw Clayton Christensen talk about this. I never saw any of the Dublin guys or anybody else talk about, hey, wait a second, how many hours did you put in to create those innovations? How many hours did the teams work to make that thing happen? They're like saying, no, that's not that. It's about culture and all that. The culture is about hard work. And the hard work with creativity and sticking with it is going to make a big difference. And we are somehow taking a Gen Z population coming in now. And the Gen Z population is already imagining corner office on day one. And was already imagining that they got a knowledge because they can Google something. Just because they can Google it doesn't mean they've got wisdom. But they can find the answers. And yet they are now saying, I want experience in my work. I want to travel the world. And yet we want innovation to happen. And yet every one of those guys, including the crazy ones like we work and all those guys who are wrong, they put the hours in. It's the hours that they put in that made the difference. And we do not talk about hours.
Interesting.
That's my provocation, maybe to the academics who want to do research. We got data. We got so much data that if anybody wants to look at the data that we collect, we have worked with 800 companies. We work with over 5,000 teams. I can tell you which teams succeed. I can tell you which teams won't succeed. I'll tell you what mix of teams will succeed. But one criteria, they have to work hard. And that one doesn't show up, never shows up.
So you want the youngins to know that this is what's involved. I think, and people have that passion. And that's what transformational leadership unleashes, that passion, and people go above and beyond, and you get that moonshot. You get those people because they're working for a higher purpose. They're working for something that's meaningful to them. And I think you're going to see more of that. You actually bring a very important point as well. One of the things that I'm looking at is what is the psychological capital that allows you to do that? And I'm going to just mention, 3 and hopefully do a presentation with you folks in the future on that. Mindfulness, present moment awareness, resiliency, and emotional intelligence. Those are the 3 things that will support you in that, that tremendous workload.
Excellent. Professor Kelly, thank you very much for being here, sharing leadership and innovation. It was a great presentation. I think we've been provoked about the leaders on how they can act. They need to exploit, but they need to create exploration in the culture. You brought the idea, the notion of individuals and how individuals are divergent or convergent and how to open both sides of the equation. You brought the conversation about females specifically and how to integrate females into into this very important space called innovation and impact in the world. And I think there's other things that you provoke for every one of us over here. And so we appreciate you coming. We appreciate you waking up at 5 in the morning or whatever time it was in California to be here. And Dr. Zurek, I'll give Dr. Zurek the last word and then we can wrap it up.
Okay, thank you so much, Hitendra, for the kind words.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Kelly. It was a great talk, and yes, HP, this is a very hot topic. We wanted to addressing the model of individual innovation, team innovation, and organizational innovation, and the relationship between organizational leadership as ambidextrous and ambidextrous organization, as well as ambidextrous leadership, which is an emerging concept and style to lead innovation teams. We can share, by the way, we can share our research, which was published in 2020 and 2021. So maybe in the chat, we can share our articles and our papers about the role of CEO transformational leadership and the gender differences in innovation also.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zurek. Thank you very much, Dr. Kelly. Please send us your PPT files or PDF files, and so we can share with whoever, whatever you would like to share with us. You're always welcome back again.
Right. I'd like to negotiate for a later start. So if I can succeed in negotiating, it's just too early for me. For some reason, I'm doing this in all caps, but I'm just putting my email, lkelly@laverne.edu. I'd love to, we can connect in LinkedIn. Connect with me with my email. And I was just telling Zurek, I'm applying for a Fulbright to be on the roster with Fulbright. Plan to do a project in Jordan, but if there's any other developing country context, once I get on the roster, I'd love to work with you and work in Indonesia, work in Brazil. This would be ideal.
In the audience, just for everybody, we have people from Japan, from Hong Kong, from Korea, Indonesia. We had people from Italy, from Spain and Portugal. We have Brazilians, Colombians, Peruvians, Americans, Canadians. And so it's a very international group, and I think somebody will reach out. So it's lkelly@laverne.edu, and please reach out directly. And then, of course, reach